Okay, so today's lesson is lesson number 78. We're continuing to talk about using the quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. So, a lot like what we did on Friday, right? Today, the numbers might not be as nice, right? We had like 1 plus or minus 2 all over 3 or whatever. So, we just might have square roots that are still in our answer, but that's fine. It's not that big of a deal. And yeah. Okay, again, these steps are the same as last time. You're going to want to identify what A, B, and C are, and then plug those values into the quadratic formula, which we all know and love already, right? C equals negative B plus minus. It's going to be stuck in my head for the rest of the day now. All right, then we just evaluate, okay? And remember, when we're evaluating this, we want to start by multiplying these together. Right, so you multiply that and then kind of work your way out. So then you deal with the rest inside the square root and then add or subtract these if you can and divide. Right? Okay. So I'll go ahead and move on then. Again, we already have these steps, but if you want to, same from Friday. If you want to just rewrite the quadratic formula, that'll be helpful. I'm not going to write it for these problems because we already did a bunch, right? And we know it by now. So I'm just going to start by plugging them in. Okay. So 1 and 2, look up here to see how these are a little bit different maybe from what we did on Friday. So here I want to first make sure that my equation is equal to 0. So I need to subtract 1 from both sides. That gives me 6n squared minus 1 equals 0. Okay, now I can identify A, B, and C. I know A is 6. B is a little trickier, okay? Remember our formula is like an squared plus bn plus c. So it needs to have an n in it. We don't have anything like that, so it's like there's a plus 0n. Okay, does that make sense? Is that good? We don't have anything that just has n, so it's really like we have plus 0n, so b is just 0. Okay, and then c is negative 1. Okay, and now I'm going to I'm going to write this with the quadratic formula, plugging these values in. Okay, so now I have n equals, technically, right, because I'm solving for n. Negative b, so here that's just going to be negative 0, plus or minus the square root of b squared, 0 squared is just 0, minus 4 times a times c. Okay, 4a is 6, and c is negative 1. All over 2a, so all over 2 times 6. Okay, from this point on, it's just showing your multiplication skills, really, okay? So I'm going to start here first. Okay, start here by multiplying those 3 numbers, 4, 6, and 1. 4 times 6 gives me 24, times 1 it's just 24. I want to make sure I have the right sign, so I have 2 negatives. Negative times a negative makes a positive. So this becomes just the square root of 24. And I just had the 0 go away, right? Negative 0, that's like nothing. So it's just plus or minus the square root of 24 over 2 times 6 is 12. Okay, the square root of 24 I can rewrite as the square root of 4 times 6. Still over 12. I did that, though, because the 4 here is a perfect square, so I can bring that out as a 2. Right? So this is just n equals plus or minus 2 root 6 over 12. Okay. One last thing is that I would want to reduce this. Okay, it's just like a fraction. It looks a little fancy because there's a square root in there. But just think of the square root kind of like a variable almost at this point. Okay, we can't really touch that. But this 2 over 12 I know I can reduce. So this becomes n equals plus or minus root 6 over 6. Okay, I just reduced this by 2. Okay, do you see that? Okay, so that would be my final answer here. Questions on number 1 before I move on to number 2? No? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and show number 2 then. So you don't need to write this down yet, okay? So let's leave our pencils down, really make sure we're focusing, getting everything out of it. Okay, number 2. First thing I'm going to do is move everything over so that it's equal to 0. So I subtract 4x from both sides, and I subtract 11 from both sides. That gives me 3x squared minus 4x minus 11 equals 0. Okay, that means my A is 3, B is negative 4, and C is negative 11. Okay, you should be checking with yourself. Is that what I would have said? Do I agree with those? Am I confused right now? Why am I confused? What am I not getting? And then you ask a question, right? Okay, so that's my A, B, and C. I'm just going to plug these into the formula now. So I'm solving for x now, so this is x equals negative b, that's a negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared. B squared here, negative 4 squared is 16, right? Minus 4ac. So minus 4 times A times C. A is just 3. And C is negative 11. Right? Okay, and that's all over 2A. So 2 times 3. Okay, simplifying this, negative 4 here, that's just a positive 4. So I have x equals positive 4. Plus or minus the square root, I still have a 16. Oh, never mind. Yes, I did this together. Okay, 4 times 3 times 11. So 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 11 is 132. I have 2 negatives here, so this is going to end up being plus 132. Okay, so I have 16 plus 132. That's 148. Okay, and it's divided by 2 times 3, which is 6. All right, then I want to simplify this. 148. I want to see if I can divide that by 4 so that I can take out a perfect square like I did here. So 148 divided by 4 gives me 37. So this is just the square root of 4 times 37 all over 6. And that 4 can come out again as a 2, so I have 4 plus or minus 2 root 37 all over 6. Okay? Okay, so this 4 here came out as this 2. And I can't simplify the square root of 37 anymore. So I'm done there. What I do notice, though, like how this one was like a fraction, right? This one is 2. If I kind of ignore the square root, I see that these have a 2 in common and these two have a 2 in common as well. So I can reduce the whole thing by dividing everything by 2. Okay, doing that gives me x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 37 all over 3. Sorry, I wanted to undo my little squiggly over the 37. Okay, so that would be my final answer there. Okay, then here for number 3, same thing. We're going to want to move everything over to the left. So this is 3m squared minus 6m minus 9 equals 0. So A is 3, B is negative 6, and C is negative 9. Okay, once we've identified those, we can input them in the quadratic formula. Our variable here is m, so we have m equals negative b, which is a negative 6, and then plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 6 squared is just 36, and then minus 4 times a times c. So 4 times 3 times negative 9. Okay, and that's going to be all over 2 times a, which is just 3. The negative 6 is just a positive 6, and then plus or minus square root. 4 times 3 is 12 here. 12 times 9 gives us 108, so this is 36 plus 108. It's positive because we have 2 negatives here. Okay, and divided by 2 times 3 here, this is just 6. Okay, 36 plus 108 gives us 144 in the square root, and that gives us 12, right? The square root of 144 is just 12. So we have 6 plus or minus 12 divided by 6. I can simplify this now because they all have a 6 in common. So I have 1 plus or minus 2 over 1, which is really just 1 plus or minus 2. 1 plus 2 gives me 3. 1 minus 2 gives me negative 1. So those are my 2 answers here. Okay, number 4, I subtract the 5 so that I have p squared minus 5p minus 5 equals 0. So my a, b, and c are those numbers. Okay, so I have p equals negative b plus or minus the square root. B squared would be 25. And then minus 4ac. A is 1. C is negative 5. All over 2 times a, and a is just 1. Okay, the negative 5 here gives me a positive 5. And then I have plus or minus the square root. 4, 5, and 1 here. Those multiplied to 20. I have 2 negatives, so it's going to be a plus 20. So I have 25 plus 20. And all over 2 times 1 is just 2. 25 times plus 20, excuse me, 25 plus 20 here is going to be 45, so I have p equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 45 over 2. Square root of 45 can be simplified. We have square root of 9 times 5 all over 2, and the 9 here comes out because it's a perfect square, so it comes out as the 3. We have 5 plus or minus 3 root 5 all over 2 as our final answer here. Okay, number 5 and 6 are similar. I start by moving everything over to one side, and then I identify a, b, and c, and plug in those values into the quadratic formula. Okay, so here b squared gave me 64. I'm going to start by multiplying these together. 4 and 2 is 8. 8 times 6 is 48. And there's only one negative here, so this is going to be 64 minus 48. Okay, 8 plus or minus. And then 2 times 2 on the bottom just gives me 4. 64 minus 48 is just 16. And the square root of 16 is 4. So I have this. I can reduce everything by 4, so I have negative 2 plus or minus 1. And my 2 answers are negative 2 plus 1 gives me negative 1. Negative 2 minus 1 gives me negative 3. And there's my 2 answers. Okay, last one for today here would be number 6. And same idea where we subtract 5 from both sides to get it to the other side. We have 10x squared minus 3x minus 5 equals 0. So a equals 10, b equals negative 3, and c equals negative 5. Plugging those values into the quadratic formula, I get 3 plus or minus. So here this 3 is positive because it's a negative 3, right, for negative b. This b here is negative 3, so that gives me a positive. Okay, plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 3 squared is 9. Minus 4ac. This is a, this is c, so I'm good. And that's going to be all over 2a. A was 10. Okay, 4 times 5 times 10 is what I'm thinking about now. 4 and 5 is 20. 20 times 10 would be 200. And I have 2 negatives, so this is a positive, so it would be positive 200. 200 plus 9 is just 209. So I get 3 plus or minus the square root of 209 over 200. Sorry, over 20. And as far as I know, 209 cannot be simplified anymore, so so that would be our final answer here. Okay, and that's it for today's lesson. Thank you. See you tomorrow.